The Rebbe began to Farbrengen that it is Shabbos Parshas Kisisa. And Shabbos Parshas Kisisa, as it comes out this year, it is only a special Shabbos. It's not a special Shabbos. It's a Shabbos like every other Shabbos. There's nothing special to this Shabbos. Not only is there nothing special to this Shabbos, but as he put it, this is a Shabbos which is a hefsek in between the four Parshias. In other words, last week we read Parshas Zocher. Next Shabbos we will have Parshas Parah. This Shabbos is like a hefsek in between. It's a break, it's a pause in between, in the middle of the Dalet Parshias. It is brought in Svarim, Rebbe went on, that between the third and the fourth Shabbosim of the Parshias, there is no hefsek, there is no break in between. In other words, Parshas Parah and Parshas HaChodesh always come one following the other. And it is brought in Svarim an expression to explain this, like we find in the Seder, bein kois gimel ledaled lekois daled lo yafsik. There shouldn't be any interruption between kois gimel and kois daled. The same thing between parsha gimel and parsha daled, there isn't any interruption. And however, in the first Shabbosim, in other words, between Zocher and Parah, or between HaChodesh and Zocher, there are Shabbosim of interruption. So not only that this Shabbos has nothing special to it, but it is a Shabbos of a hefsek, of an interruption Shabbos. So, on one hand, what's so special about this Shabbos? Though, the Rebbe continued, we find the expression of the concept of a hefsek, of a pause, we find it in a positive way. And this we find in Chumash Vayikra. Rashi tells us there that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe, he made a hefsek, he made an interruption between parsha la parsha, between one parsha and the other parsha, so that Moshe Rabbeinu should have an opportunity to be able to dwell in, to understand properly into the words of Hashem. So we find that the inyan of a hefsek is something positive. But that is over there in that particular case. But here what we find the hefsek, this Shabbos, being a hefsek, being an interruption between the special parshias which were in the middle now, it turns the Shabbos into a very simple Shabbos on one hand. However, says we find simple Shabbosim in the winter weeks and the summer weeks where they're playing Shabbosim, just the parsha which we read on that Shabbos, without anything special to it. However, the fact that this is the hefsek Shabbos makes it even yet simpler than a regular Shabbos. But the Rebbe Zilgzunzai went on to say, this Shabbos comes right after Purim. And in general we know that Shabbos elevates the entire week. The whole inyan of Shabbos is Tainug. Vayechulu hashamayim va'aretz, which just applies to Shabbos. And Chassidus stresses, what is the inyan of Vayechulu? It is an inyan of Tainug. How great is the Tainug of this Shabbos, which uplifts such outstanding day as the days of Purim. Shabbos uplifts the entire week, and in this week we had Purim. Purim is the day which we're supposed to observe Purim in a sense of Chayiv inish lepsume bepurya. One is supposed to rejoice on Purim adelo yada, until he will not know the difference between Avraham and Baruch Mordechai. So this is such a special day where we are at the way highest peak of Tainug. This is the highest peak of Tainug, is this type of description which is given in Negei Purim. Comes the Shabbos after Purim, this inyan of Shabbos is Tainug. Memela, we can imagine how great this Shabbos is, because this Shabbos elevates the days of Purim. Especially that Purim wasn't the latter part of the week. And as we know, it is brought in Svarim that from Wednesday on, it already has a shaykhus to the forthcoming Shabbos. And Purim was not on a Wednesday. Purim was on a Thursday, so it's yet closer to Shabbos. And especially Purim in the cities of Mukafes Chaim, and the cities that are surrounded with a wall, Mimais Yeshua Benun, like Yerushalayim, they celebrate Purim on the 15th day in Adar. When is that? Friday. So it's actually that Purim, the Thursday and the Friday, which is Purim, we go straight from Purim into Shabbos. Yes. Furthermore, the Rebbe continued, if we would be in a date of the 18th day of Adar, for example, the 18th day of Adar has no specialty to it other than the fact that it is a day in the month of Adar, which the month of Adar is also a special month. As we read in the Megillah, the entire month was turned from a month of sorrow to a month of joy. However, the days which come immediately after Purim, which these are the days of the 16th and the 17th days in the month of Adar, these are very special days and come as a continuation to Purim. Because the Gemara raises the question, the Megillah is written that the Megillah should be written and Purim should be observed bizmanehem, and the days of Purim, in its time. And in its time is written in the Megillah in a plural expression, bizmanehem. So the Gemara discusses this pasuk, and based on this pasuk, the Gemara says that the Megillah could be read from Yud Aleph Adar, from 11 days in the month of Adar, the 11th, the 12th. In other words, we're not just limited to read the Megillah Dafka on the 14th day of Adar, depending on circumstances, as the Gemara discusses. The Megillah could also be read earlier. Then the Gemara raises the question, how about reading the Megillah on the 16th day or on the 17th day? So the Gemara says, there's an expression in the Megillah, v'lo yaver, we shall not pass the days of Purim. So the Gemara derives from this pasuk that we can only read the Megillah on days before Purim. However, the days right after Purim, we cannot read the Megillah. What do we see from this? That the Gemara had an intention that these days are so close to Purim that we should be able to read the Megillah on these days. The only thing, because of a limud of a pasuk, because we derive from a special word in the Megillah, that we do not read the Megillah on these days. But would it not be for this word, we would be able to read the Megillah on these days? So Mamela, the days which we are in now, we are mamish still in days which have a very close shaykhus to Purim. And as the Rebbe continued this inyan, he began explaining that on one hand, we are talking about the greatness of Tainuk, which as Chassidus stresses at length, this is a very high level in Avodas Hashem. And on the other hand, Chassidus in Torah in general, and Chassidus in particular, makes a big issue and stresses the greatness of the Avodas Hashem mitoich mesiras nefesh. So the Rebbe raised the question, how can these two inyanim come together? Obviously, these are contrary inyanim. The inyan of Tainuk is when one serves the Rebishta out of a feeling of pleasantness. This is something which is contrary to the concept of Mesiras Nefesh. When one has to sacrifice his life, Mesiras Nefesh, for the Rebishta, it is take done, but we cannot say that this is a mood of Tainuk. And the Rebbe went into a lengthy explanation how Chassidus ties both in Yanim together, and it could be the Avodah metoich Tainug, and at the same time it will be at a level of Mesiras Nefesh. And from this inyan, the Rebbe led into another inyan, whereby he explained that when we are involved in inyanim, and we have to utilize our influence on other Yidden, we never could know when is the right moment, when we're gonna have. In other words, when is the punchline moment when we will be effective and we will accomplish tremendous things? And here the Rebbe brought the famous story from Rabbi Yosef Balagola. There was a chassid of the Mittler Rebbe, who was a tremendous chassid and a very big scholar and a very big goyen. And one day the Mittler Rebbe called him in and told him that he should stop whatever he is doing and he should become a Balagola. Initially he had mixed feelings to what the Rebbe told him. This Reb Yosef, the story is related from the Frierdiker Rebbe in all its details. This Reb Yosef, who was known in his city to be an outstanding scholar, an outstanding Talmid Chacham, and here he's going to become a Balagola. Balagola was looked upon as one of the most lowest occupations in those days. That's right, somebody would drive a wagon. Drive people with a horse and buggy from one place to another. But the Rebbe told him, so immediately he followed his instructions and he did it. And as the story goes, it was related by the Frierdiker Rebbe in detail, that after many years of Rabbi Yosef being a Balagola, he had tremendous accomplishments when he made contact with a Yid and turned this Yid into a Baal Tshuva. So the Rebbe said, actually, why did the Mittler Rebbe have to go this way? The Mittler Rebbe could have given him a much easier assignment. He should have told Rabbi Yosef, why become a Balagola? Why go through all these hardships? He should have had him sit and learn and tell him that at this given day and at this given time, he should be in this and this place, and then he would have the confrontation with this Yid, and he would utilize his influence to make the Yid a Baal Tshuva. So we see that's not how it works. We have to do ours. We have to be involved in Miftzayim, and the Rebbe named all of the Miftzayim, and be involved in seeking to be Mekarev more Yidden and more Yidden. The right thing is going to come, and when this is going to happen, we have no way of knowing. And the Rebbe brought the example from the Megillah. In the Megillah we find that Bishnash Shalish L'Molchai, it was in the 3rd year when Achashverosh was a ruler, he made a big feast. And at this big feast, it was Kirtzayin Ish Va'ish. This is how the Megillah describes it. So a Chazal comment, what is the meaning of Kirtzayin Ish Va'ish? Chazal tell us that he satisfied everybody. He satisfied Mordechai and he satisfied Haman. From one extreme to the other. What did all this lead to as we read the Megillah with all the details? In later years, what happened was, this was the beginning of the story which in later years led to the Nes of Megillah Esther. So Rabbi used the expression, what was Mordechai? A pianitze? It's a Russian word which means somebody who was, I understand, meaning an alcoholic. In other words, or someone who's addicted to drink. Mordechai was not a pianitze. And Mordechai still saw it important to go to participate in the feast of Achashverosh and say what type of wine should be drinking. Kirtzayin Ish Ve'ish. In other words, this was the wine which was satisfactory to Mordechai. And many, many years later, this had a result. What was the result? This whole chain of events led to the result of the tremendousness, how Klal Yisrael was saved. The same the Rebbe says is B'negei Ara Aveda. And where do we really find a source for this interpretation? This is the famous teaching which was related to us by the Baal Shem Tov, related in the name through all the Rabbeim, and related to us by the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov expressed himself that a neshama comes down onto this world to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and a neshama spends a period of 70 or 80 years on this world, and at times it may be to do one taiva, one favor, begashmiyas or beruchniyas to a yid. So again, person comes down and lives his entire lifespan on this world and goes through whatever he goes through in this world. And why does he go all of this through? And why does all of this happen? So that sometime, somewhere during his life, he will do one favor, whether it is a taiva begashmiyas or a taiva beruchniyas to a yid. So this is identical like to the story of Rabbi Yosef Balagola and to the story of Mordechai in the Megillah. The same is with each and every one of us. The only thing is we do not know when it happens and what is the kavanah of our coming down into this world, which is the favor which we fulfill, or which is the act or deed which we do, which is the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent our neshama into this world. But this is how the Rebishter wants it to be, that we have to be involved and do the right thing all our years. And by doing this, we will also come across the inyan which we was sent down into shlichus, which our neshama shlichus was to come down onto this world. And again the Rebbe came back to Purim. And being that we are now in the Shabbos, which has a shaychus to Purim, so Purim, Taki, we were told that we have to do all the mifzoyim of Purim, Benegeya, fulfilling them in the sense of fulfilling all the mitzvahs of Purim. However, we still can be involved now also in the mifzoyim of Purim. Why? Because what Purim is all about? The message of Purim is Laihudim, Haisa Oira, V'simcha, V'sasayim, V'yakar. This is what the Megillah tells us. That the idea of Purim is to bring light and simcha and happiness and joy to Yidden. This is what Simchas Purim is about. Memele, this inyan of Purim, this is something which is not just limited to the day of Purim. This is something which we have to take along with us for the entire year. Memele, this is the Pashat Pshat in the Pasuk. There is also how the Chachamim interpret the Pasuk. Chazal interpret the Pasuk that Oira, what does it mean to a Yid? Light, Lichtikai. To a Yid it means Oira zu Teira. V'yikar, on the word V'yikar, the Chazal comment, it means Tfil. So in other words, Tfil Sheberosh, what do we take along from Purim? Purim gives us, injects us, and gives us inspiration to take along koiches from Purim to be able to learn Torah ourselves, to be able to learn Torah with others, to be able to fulfill the miftzayim, to reach out to other Yidden. Memele, Miftzah Purim is not something which is just limited to the day of Purim. When we're talking about the day of Purim, here we are limited naturally in the fulfillment of the mitzvahs which have a shaychus to the day of Purim. However, when we're talking in a broader way, from the spiritual aspect, from the message which Purim brings, here we are taking along these miftzayim of Purim and we are taking them along with us for the entire year. Then, the Rebbe Zalgazan says, begins the next sikha, and he says again, based on what we just spoke, that we are actually still into Purim. And on Purim we are told that we are to rejoice to such an extent, the famous Gemara, until we come to a level of Ada Lo Yada. Rebbe says that on Purim, there are some individuals which it's hard for them to fulfill Ada Lo Yada. People who are involved in community work, and therefore they are busy on Purim. So it's not proper for them on Purim to bring themselves into a position of Ada Lo Yada. Another group of such people, the Rebbe says, would be Seifrim, a scribe, a Seifer. A Seifer, the Rebbe says, is not allowed to drink mashke. Why? He will drink, and he has to write. And when he has to write the Pashiyas or Tefillin or Mezuzahs, he has to be extremely careful. We know that if he makes a difference, if he's not accurate, not in a letter, in one little part of the letter, it could bring, Rabbi used the expression, he could destroy worlds. Very simple. Mara uses the expression, Mara brings it, Benegayim, exchanging a dalet into a reish. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Hechad. Chas v'shalom, if the Sefer will not write a clear dalet, but wouldn't put the little extension which a dalet requires, and would come out as a reish, then he's destroying words. And the same thing where a reish is required, and he will not put the reish, but he will put a dalet, just add a little bit more ink, he will again exchange words totally from their meaning. The Mele has to be extremely careful in his profession. And if he's that careful, and it comes on Purim, he may be getting on Purim also Parshas to review, or Mezuzahs to review, or whatever the case may be, and he wouldn't be careful, so it wouldn't be proper. However, when it comes on Shabbos he has no problem. And therefore, on Shabbos he can, without any hesitation, go ahead and fulfill the Chayev Inish L'Psuma B'Puri. And the Rebbe said that he's referring to a specific Sefer, and he doesn't have to come on to mention him by name, by his name and by his mother's name. The Rebbe added, though it is a special schus for his mother these days, that's the expression which the Rebbe used, but let him understand himself whom he means, and let him say l'chaim, and this should bring to bracha, to success, in all of his writings, and particularly in the writings of Sefer Torahs, which Sefer Torahs, especially the Sefer Torahs HaKloliyim, which these are Sefer Torahs which unite all of Klal Yisrael. And again, the Rebbe mentioned the importance of seeing to it that each and every Yid should have a letter in the Sefer Torah, and by every Yid having a letter in the Sefer Torah, he's united with all the hundreds of thousands of other Yidden who also participate by having a letter in the Sefer Torah. It seems that the Rebbe, it was obvious, right? The Rebbe was referring to Rabbi Zirkin, because right afterwards he said l'chaim, and the Rebbe turned to him and told him to say l'chaim again, and on a large kais and a large becha. After the Rebbe spoke this inyan, the Rebbe pursued further, and he said, it seems that there are other occupations which also on Purim, for whatever reason, they did not fulfill the chayev inish l'psume bepuria. And whom is he referring to? He's referring to Rabbanim. And the Rav feels that it's not proper for him to go ahead on Purim. He would be out of line if he would go ahead and be mekayim on Purim the chayev inish l'psume bepuria. Says his balabatim, his members, look at him, and they see him in the morning, they see him at Megillah reading. And at Megillah reading, he is not in a position, of besuma bepuria. Then later they can meet him during the day when they bring him shalach manas, and they again see that the Rav is in as regular as he is all year round. And the Rebbe says it's kind of strange, because the Rav is the one who's supposed to be the source of Yirah Shamayim to his balabatim. So it comes on Purim, they should see how their Rav acts on Purim. And here we're talking about Rabbanim, and they feel that they don't want to drink on Purim. Why? Because they probably think that they have to be involved in paskening shilas constantly, because the entire world relies on them. So they have to be able to pasken shilas properly. Memela, if he will say l'chaim, and a shiloh will come to him, and who knows from where a shiloh could come? Shilohs could come to him from all over the world. And a shiloh will come to him, and he will not be able to respond properly. Furthermore, he says, we're talking in this country, and the Rav speaks in public on Purim, and he does not want to say l'chaim on Purim, because he feels it may affect his accent, the way he will speak. And therefore he's refraining himself and holding himself back from saying l'chaim on Purim, from fulfilling the chayev inish l'psume bepuria on Purim. And the Rebbe related here an episode which happened with his father many years ago. Rebbe said his father was the Rav in a Hasidic shtat it's a city known as Yekaterinoslav. He succeeded another Hasidic Rav. And when his father was appointed, it seems like there was a segment of people in town who were not happy with the appointment of his father as a Rav. What did they do? How would he be able to do something against his father? He says his father was a Lubavitcher Chassid. So he says, Lubavitcher Chassidim are used to these things already. What they did was, they went with a Mesira. They mastered, they snitched. In other words, they informed. They informed something about his father to the government, that he wasn't acting properly. One day, the head of the police of Yekaterinoslav came to the house, and as Yidden lived in those days, when the circumstances Yidden lived under, when the head of the police came knocking on a Jewish house, it definitely did not bring joy. Rebbe says, he came into the house, and he asked that he wants to speak to his father in privacy. After he left, the Rebbe says he asked his father, what did he want? So his father told him that he had a tremendous complaint against him. What was it? that he, the Rebbe's father, as the Rav of the city of Yekaterineslav, is not behaving properly. He's not behaving properly. He's not acting, he's not living up to the standards of what a Rav in that city should live up to. And the chief of the police explained him. He said, this city of Yekaterineslav happens to be the main city in that entire area. And taking in consideration that he is the chief of the police of that city, this in itself is an indication what kind of an important city it is. And here the Jewish Rav is not acting properly. What did the Jewish Rav do? He danced together with the shoemaker of town. What happened? Rebbe says in those days, a shoemaker was looked at a very low-end occupation. So it was Yutas Kislev. And Yutas Kislev, as the custom of Hasidim is, that Hasidim gather in a Hasidische Farbrengen. Hasidim gather to the Hasidische Farbrengen, which this is also, how did Yutas Kislev originate? It also originated because they informed in Yonim on the Alter Rebbe. In fact, I don't know if the Rebbe mentioned it here or he mentioned it later in the Farbrengen, it was mentioned today. In fact, one of the Inyanim which they had against the Alter Rebbe was that the Alter Rebbe is a Moired b'Malchus. He's rebelling against the Tsar. How do they see that the Alter Rebbe is rebelling against the Tsar? Because the Alter Rebbe had within him a tremendous tshuka, a tremendous desire to elevate himself for his own spiritual elevation to Sfiras HaMalchus, to associate himself with the Rebishter. They didn't understand exactly what was going on actually with the Alter Rebbe. In fact, the Rebbe says that they tested him. It seems like they had means of evaluating the Alter Rebbe, and they saw that the Alter Rebbe is having some inner strive within him, some inner drive in him, which is driving him some teshuka, some tremendous desire to reach to something very high. Now, naturally, what could the Goyim then interpret? What is something very high which an individual wants to reach to? He wants to reach to become the Melech, to become the king of that time, Russia. Naturally, this was not the Alter Rebbe's intention in any way whatsoever. The Alter Rebbe's intention was to associate himself, to become vereinzigt with Malchus Ein Sof, with the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when the Rebbe's father participated, and not only participated, stood at the head of a Yutas Kislev de Farbrengen in the city of Yekaterineslav, then one of the shoemakers came over to him, and the Rebbe's father, who expressed Avos Yisrael to each and every Yid, greeted him very warm. And as a result of this very warm reception, which he gave him, later in the Farbrengen, as the Farbrengen became warmer, so to speak, the Farbrengen became warmer. Again, I don't know if it was mentioned here, it was mentioned later in the Farbrengen. Rebbe used the expression that when Hasidim used to say that, there's a famous Yiddish expression, am ishmiert Fortman. In other words, in those days when they used to travel with a horse and buggy, with a wagon, so if the wheels of the wagon would be greased properly with oil, you'd be able to travel. If the wheels aren't greased, then it makes it very hard on traveling. So the same thing Chassidim would say, a Yid darf euch fahren. Wo darf fahren? A Yid darf fahren. A Yid also has to travel. He has his journey of getting closer and closer to the Rebishter. What is one of the means of warming up a Yid, that the journey should be more successful, the journey soll sich fahren besser, it should be able to travel easier? That is, when the wheels are greased properly. What does this mean in this sense? So Bachsidim, it always would mean the taking of a little bit of mashke. And taking a little bit of mashke would warm up Chassidim, and Mela, this would be looked at as greasing the wheels properly, and thereby they'd be able to travel better and safer to their destination. So this is what the head of the police had against of Yekaterinoslev complained to the Rebbe's father, and he said that if he's not going to adjust it, he will have to file a complaint to the gubernator, to the yet higher official of not only of that town but of the entire area, because a Jewish Rav is supposed to act properly, and here he's not acting properly. He's dancing with the shoemaker. So the Rebbe used this as an example how wrong it is certain times to take out of, it's taken out of looking wrong what the proper covet of a Rav is. Same thing when a Geya our Inyan comes Purim, a Rav has to say L'chaim, has to be Mekayim the Chayim Vinish Lipsume V'Purya, and on the contrary, his Balabatim will see him doing it. So they will also do the same, and by doing this, Yidden will rejoice on Purim as it should be. Memele, if there are some Rabbanim here in the Farbrengen who did not do it on Purim, for all these reasons as we just mentioned, so today they still have it's still an opportune time on Shabbos to fulfill the Chayev Vinish L'Psum V'Purya. Whatever we did not do on Purim could still be made up today. Then the Rebbe went further and he said that we find something strange in this week's Haftarah. In this week's Haftarah we find, in today's Haftarah which was read this morning, we find the expression regarding the Yidden from Sephardim. In other words, this is where we find the definition between Sephardim and Ashkenazim. So Rebbe says he's going to talk about it now, because it's recently that, again, Rebbe spoke about the union of Miu Yehudi. And this is something, how severe it is and how serious it is, what kind of a serious problem. Rebbe spoke about it Purim as well at length. And the reason he's mentioning it is because recently we've not been getting the proper cooperation from the Sfardische Rabbanim regarding the inyan of Miu Yehudi. The Rebbe says what he wants to forewarn is what happens is, many times when he discusses such inyanim in a Farbrengen, people understand them not the right way. And usually what happens is it is turned into a machloik, it is turned into a quarrel, in other words, it's raised into an issue that he said something against somebody. And this is not what he means. He's not saying nothing against anybody. All he's asking is that everybody should work united and all koiches should be put to resolve this problem of the Mi Yehudi law. But the Rebbe said this is the only law in Eretz Yisrael which is totally against Hashem and against Torah. There are other laws in the system, however, their details it's only in certain details of the rulings which are not in full agreement with Inyanim of Torah. However, the Inyan of Mi Yehudi is a choik. This is a law. The law of return is such a law which the entire law is against Torah, is against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, against the Rebishter. And therefore this is something which we must put our efforts to see to it, to amend it immediately. And there the Rebbe compared it, said, a mouse is an unwanted creature. And we have there are two that fight to get the mouse away from the house. It is the housewife, who cannot tolerate the mouse. And it is also a cat who cannot tolerate the mouse. What is the difference, the Rebbe says? The difference is a very big one. The housewife cannot tolerate the mouse, so she doesn't want the mouse there, period. Just as she's doing tachbulos and inyanim to get the mouse out of the kitchen, out of the house. However, the Rebbe says when we're talking about the cat doesn't want the mouse out. The cat wants the mouse there and just wants to make freilich, use the expression. For the cat, it is happier when there's a mouse, so the cat and the mouse are quarreling amongst each other. The same thing the Rebbe says there, when his words are taken out of its true contents, what he really means. And people want to take his words and blow up a machloika and turn it into an inyan that he said something against somebody or something. This is like the cat. He said something. So we can turn his words into some sort of an issue and create ill feelings between the Rebbe and other people. This is not what he means. This is not his intention. His intention is a pure intention, like the housewife who's trying to get the mouse out of the kitchen. His has one pure intention, that the inyan of Mi Yehudi must be corrected. And then the Rebbe said that there are some Zacha B'Goyrel, people who won a Goyrel in France to come here for Purim, and they are also Svardim. He was talking about the Svardim, so they are also Svardim. So it is appropriate for them too to say L'chaim. Then, that it's appropriate for the Rabbanim to say L'chaim, and for the Askonim, the Rebbe says they too do not fulfill Adel Yadam Purim. Then the Rebbe says, really in the Megillah, we don't find any difference between Ashkenazim and Sfardim. When we're talking the Megillah about Yidden, we talk about Yidden, and Yidden include everybody. So therefore the Rebbe says, it is a proper time for everybody to go ahead and say L'chaim, and say L'chaim with the best intentions. And by saying L'chaim now, we're not only saying L'chaim oneself, but not only himself saying L'chaim, but giving L'chaim to other Yidden. In the Megillah it is written, Ve'elai Yehudim, Kichsavam Ukol Sheinam, all Yidden alike, no difference, Svardim or Ashkenazim. So by saying L'chaim now, the Rebbe says, and with having proper intentions, this will bring bracha and atzlacha for the entire year, that the entire year will be a blessed year, and we will take the simcha from Purim with us for the entire year. Talking about somewhere in these siches, I do not recall exactly where, but the Rebbe was talking, it is our obligation to reach out to other Yidden, and there are no excuses, everybody has to do it. You have to reach out regarding all the Mifzoyim, Avas Yisrael, Achdus Yisrael, and bring Yidden closer to the HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to Chassidus and to Yiddishkeit. While talking about this, the Rebbe says there are some that may say that it is not befitting for him. He is an outstanding person, and he doesn't even mean his own pride. The Rebbe brought an episode that it was once in Leningrad, the city of Leningrad, in the times of the Rebbe Rashab, where the Chassidim picked on one specific Chassid. In other words, this Chassid was really, really treated himself properly. And Chassidim wanted to rub it into him a little bit. So, Rebbe says there are two versions as he heard it. There's one version that they put him on the pole. In other words, they just put him down on the floor. Another version is that not only did they put him down on the floor, but him noch reingezimbelt a bissel also. In other words, they gave him what we would call a mashkanta. A little bit of a whipping. In other words, they wanted to rub him out a little bit. After all of this was over, the person gets up and he says, no, the fact that they offended him doesn't bother him. I mean, he doesn't care about himself. But he's a very great Talmid Chacham. And what really happened was, it was an embarrassment for Torah. And this is what he's meicha, he's complaining against, how dare they embarrass Torah in such a way? So the Rebbe says, this is how he spoke after he got this. After he got this treatment. Could we imagine what he would have said before he got that treatment? The Mela, the Rebbe says, we do not have to come on to such type of situations where we will say we don't mean ourselves, but we mean the Torah which one has within him, and therefore it is not befitting for him to do such an inyan or such an inyan. It is not so. It is the obligation of each and every one of us in all ways to be involved heavily in all the inyanim of Mifzoyim, and to reach out to as many Yidden as possible and share our knowledge and share our Yiddishkeit with them, and see to it to bring them close to all of the inyanim of Yiddishkeit. And the Rebbe again counted all of the Mifzoyim. Each one of them, there are Mifzoyim which pertain particularly to women. Kashrus, Hadlakas Hanei, and Taras HaMishpacha, and all of the other Mifzoyim, and it is our obligation to see to it, to reach out to each and every Yid, and bringing them closer to the Eibishter. The Rebbe continued the Farbrengen with the Rashi in this week's Sedre, as well as also a Rashi in last week's Sedre. If we remember, last week, the Rebbe raised the question in a Rashi in Chumash, in Pashas Tetzaveh, and did not answer it. He did not answer it, and he said, use the expression, Tein lechacham v'yechkam oid. Leave it up to the smart person, and he will find a teretz himself. In fact, in the various publications which were published here, which contain discussions on the Sichas of the Rebbe. Many people wrote various tirutzim, various explanations and interpretations regarding this question. And that is, let us go to Parshas Tetzaveh. In Kapitel Chav Ches, Pasuk Mem Aleph, we are learning the psukim about the Kohen, Kohenim and Kohenim G'daylim, the various special clothes, garments which a Kohen had to wear. And the pasuk says, "V'ilbashtem oisam es Aaron echicha v'zbano v'itoi." You shall put it on Aaron and on his children. You shall put it on what? The various clothing, obviously. What does Rashi comment? Oisam ha'amurim ba'Aaron, the clothes which we just discussed in the psukim. Choshen, ve'ephod, u'me'il, u'ksoinis tashbeitz, mitznefes, ve'avneit, v'tzitz. Rashi lists all the different begodim which Aaron wore, all the 8 clothes. Then Rashi goes on, u'michnasayim, and also the special pants which a Kohen Gadol wore, haksuvim lamata, which this has not been discussed yet. This will be discussed further. In other words, Pasuk Membeis discusses v'asei lahem michnasei bat. So the Rebbe raised the question in the last week's Farbrengen, why does Rashi have to mention also the pants? If we haven't learned about the Michnasayim yet, in fact, Adam Mefarshei HaTorah, the Rechaim HaKodesh, Taka learns that what does the pasuk refer to? V'ilbashta Isa mes Aaron achicha, that Moshe will put him on Aaron. Taka, not pants, because we haven't learned yet about the pants. Why does Rashi have to get involved with an inyan which the pasuk hasn't mentioned yet? Especially the fact that we see that the pasuk doesn't mention it yet, but the pasuk mentions it in the next pasuk, the following pasuk. This in itself should have been an indication that the clothes which Moshe is putting on Aaron now is all the clothes except the Michnasayim, because we haven't learned about the Michnasayim yet. This is basically the question which the Rebbe Zilgazon asked in last week's Farbrengen and reviewed it today again. Today, he said we have to learn that the teretz for this question also has to be in the realm of Pshuta Shel Mikra. Because this is how Rashi's inyan is to teach Chumash, and this is how the child is learning Chumash. Rebbe is learning as follows. We see from the sequence of the psukim here that Moshe was the one that gave Kedusha into Aaron. He gave the Kedusha as an emissary of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, if not for Moshe dressing them the clothes, and which is not just a mere dressing, by doing this, he gave Kedusha into Aaron and into Bana. So later, when they were Makriv Karbanis, the Karbanis which they were Makriv had, each and every Korban had its proper accomplishment. If the Bnei Aaron wouldn't have become Kadosh, then their accomplishments by Karbanis wouldn't even been accomplished, wouldn't even be considered an accomplishment. In other words, once he has the Kedushas Kehuna in him, that is when everything which he does is considered a proper avoid. If we look through the Psukim Vaita, Pasuk tells us that Ves Aaron Ves Bonav Takrid El Pesach El Meid, we find this Pasuk in Kapitel Chav Tes, Pasuk Dalet. V'rachatzta Oisam B'moyim. Strange thing. Moshe was told that he should wash Aaron and his children B'moyim. In other words, what we're learning about really here, all of this is various phases, levels which in Yonim, which Moshe had to do in order that Aaron, to create the concept of Kehuna, that it should work properly. And Aaron should have the full inyan of Kedusha within him, the Kedusha's Kehuna, that all his Avodas, his and his children's, should be considered proper Avodas. He had to go through this type of an orientation. This is what we see from the Psukim. He couldn't wash himself. Who was the one that had to do it? Moshe had to do it. Nobody else. Moshe couldn't appoint anybody to do it to Aaron. Aaron couldn't do it himself. It was a special tzivui of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Moshe, Memela. When Rashi sees here the pasuk, V'ilbashta oisam es Aaron, achicha v'ezbana v'itoi, so Rashi must learn that this regards to all the begodim. We cannot say that there is a beged here which is not included. Why is it not mentioned here? It's a bezunder kasha. In other words, why isn't it not mentioned until now? It's a separate question. It's a question in itself. However, Rashi cannot learn that Moshe is dressing Aaron. Well, it's not stam dressing. This is the dressing which Moshe had to do one time. It's a one-time inyan which Moshe had to do. And by doing this, he did it b'shlichusay as an emissary of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This brought to Aaron the complete fulfillment that Aaron could serve as a kohen. Memela Rashi cannot learn that he put him on everything other than one garment. It is not so. He had to put on all the clothes. That's why Rashi also has to mention Umichnasayim and the pants Amurim Lamato, which I discussed weiter. And here the Rebbe says we see something else. There was a commandment that he had to make the pants for Aaron. Actually, the wearing of pants, every human being wears pants. It says even a para adam, the wildest person, wears pants. And here we see when there comes a mitzvah that the Torah tells him to make michnesei bod, it becomes a mitzvah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Mela, though it's normal tznius, a person cannot go without it. And the Gemara in fact tells us, if the Torah wouldn't be given, we would learn tznius, we would understand ourselves that we have to fulfill tznius, we would learn in Yonim of tznius from various chayis which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. But the fact is now that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did tell us about tznius, and we fulfill it. The Rebbe used the expression, the Kohenim's wearing, the Michnasayim, has the same shturim, is the same importance as Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Now it is done not because of the fact that we learn tznius from Balachayim. Now it is done because of the fact we are living up to the rules and regulations of tznius because HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to do so. Just like in the Torah went on, we cannot differentiate between one pasuk and another. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and the pasuk Va'achois Loiton Timna all have the same kedusha. These are all the kedushas of Torah. The same. This inyan of wearing pants, though, it is something which is self-understood. A person cannot go different. However, once it is mentioned in the Torah, it is already a mitzvah of the Rebbe. And by doing this, we fulfill a mitzvah. And then the Rebbe also learned a Rashi in this week's Sedre. In this week's Sedre, it is in Kapitel Lamed Daled, Pasuk Hey. Vayered Hashem ba'onon, vayisyatzev im Mosham, vayikra b'shem Hashem. Vayikra b'shem Hashem, called the name of Hashem. That's what it says in the Pasuk. What does Rashi comment on these words? Metargeminon, ukra b'shmo da Hashem. The Targum makes on these words, comments on these words, ukra, which kra means the same as vayikra, called, bishma means in the name, b'shem in Lashon Kodesh means in the name, and bishma in Aramic means b'shem. Then he goes ahead, that. Rebbe asked, what is really Rashi quoting here from the Targum? And what does this add in the Pshat of the Pasuk? Rebbe said, really we could learn in two ways. What is the meaning of Vayikra b'shem Hashem? It was called in Hashem's name. Who called? Was it Moshe that called, or was it Hashem that called? In fact, the Rebbe says there are various manuscripts. Here we have the Targum, Ukra b'shmo da Hashem. There are various old manuscripts of Targum where it is written, Ukra b'shmo Hashem. And the question is, what is the difference? Ukra b'shmo Hashem would mean Moshe called in Hashem's name. Ukra b'shmo de Hashem means HaKadosh Baruch Hu called his name. What is the difference? So Rebbe is learning. One way, if we look into the pasuk, Vayered Hashem ba'onon, Vayisyatzev im Mosham. Whom did he stand with? With Moshe. Vayikra b'shem Hashem, and he called in the name of Hashem. So on one hand we see Moshe being mentioned here. So this could be an indication that who was the one of Vayikra, it was also Moshe. But it is not so. That is why Rashi comes to stress that the Vayikra b'shem Hashem, and Rashi quotes the Targum. The Rebbe brought, we find in this Sedre in itself several occasions where Rashi quotes from Targum. By the Kiyar and Kanoi, by the sink which was set up in the Mishkan. We find it at the end of the Sedre. Masve al Ponov. The very end of the Sedre, Vayitan al Ponov Masve. We also find Rashi quoting the Targum. And here Rashi is also quoting the Targum. Because Rashi is out to quote the Targum, not just to quote the Targum. Rashi is learning this pshat in the pasuk. That what does it mean that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was the one that called to Moshe? Not Moshe called Hashem's name, HaKadosh Baruch Hu called his own name. Interesting that we have commentaries on Rashi. And they are very choshev commentaries on Rashi. There is the Ram, Rabbi Yoel Mizrahi. There's another commentary on Rashi called Gur Aryeh. The Gur Aryeh was edited by the Maral Meprog. The Ram, the Rabbi Yoel Mizrahi, learns the pshat that the Vayikra b'Shem Hashem, he learns in Rashi, that Rashi learns that it means that Moshe called Hashem's name. However, the Gur Aryeh learns that, the Maral learns that it was Hashem that called his name. Rabbi said, actually, it's a little hard, I use these words, it's hard to say different than other Mefarshim, because the Rebbe is leaning with the pshat, that who was the one that called? It was not Moshe, it was the Rebishter that called. So first of all, we have to go according to the realm of Pshuti Shel Mikra. In the realm of Pshuti Shel Mikra, we already learned in Rashi, that Rashi already explained that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe how to beg for Rachmim. Like a shliach tzibah, like a chazan that gets dressed with a talis. The Mela, so it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu who's telling Moshe what to do. So based on that Rashi, we are learning here the same, Vayikra b'Shem Hashem, meaning that what is the Vayikra b'Shem Hashem? It was HaKadosh Baruch Hu that called the name, called his name. The Rebbe said, we have, there's an acceptable belief that all the Mefarshim, all the Svarim which were written until the Marsha, were written based on Ruach HaKodesh. Memela, when we're talking about the Pirush of Rabbi Yoel Mizrahi, who is learning Pshat and Rashi, different than we just discussed. He's learning Pshat and Rashi, that Rashi means that who is the one that called? It is Moshe Rabbeinu was the one that called. So he says, all the commentaries on Rashi all agree that Rashi's inyan l'koy l'roish, first and foremost, is Pshuta Shel Mikra. However, these Mefarshim, Rabbi Yoel Mizrahi, and others, what they wanted to do many times is not only it should remain Rashi in Pshuta Shel Mikra, it should be Rashi in Pshat, and they wanted to make that the Pshat in Rashi should also agree as the Inyanim come out al pi halacha and other chelkei HaTorah. And the Rebbe compared it, we know that there's a famous saying from the Frierdiker Rebbe that in Rashi there is also Yeno Shel Torah, the wine of Torah, which means Pnimis HaTorah, Chasidus, is also hidden in Rashi. So those Mefarshim wanted that in Inyanim of Rashi should agree not only with Pshat, but with halacha of Torah as well. But the Rebbe says, as far as we are concerned, we are learning Rashi, that Rashi's inyan is to tie choice Pshuta Shel Mikra. And that is our prime concern. And furthermore, the Rebbe said, Rabbi Yoel Mizrahi says that what does the Vayikra apply to? The Vayikra applies to Moshe. The Mela, if it applies to Moshe, Moshe's inyan was Nigla the Torah. That was Moshe's inyan. However, the Maral, who's the Maral we know how the Shaykhs to Chassidus. The Maral learns that who does the Vayikra refer to? The Vayikra refers to the Rebishter. So it's an inyan that comes not only from Nigla, but it's an inyan which has a Shaykhs to Pnimius as well. In these Sichas, the Rebbe was talking that we are constantly hoping for the coming of Mashiach. The Rebbe says we are hoping for the coming of Mashiach even on Shabbos. And when Mashiach comes, he will immediately take us to Eretz Yisrael. And we know that famous quotation in Chazal, that how we're going to go, we're going to be traveling on clouds. Ru'u im anona shamaya. The Rebbe says there's a whole discussion al pi halacha whether there's an inyan of tchumen l'mayla ma'asor. In other words, we know we are limited on Shabbos, we're not allowed to go outside of a tchum Shabbos. So the question now arises, do these boundaries of tchumen also apply l'mayla ma'asora higher than 10 tefachim? This is discussed in halacha. So the clouds are higher. So Rebbe says this is something which Mashiach will solve, and Mashiach and Eliyahu Navi, when they will come, they will solve this problem for us as well, as we have the famous abbreviation of Teiku, that Tishbi Yetaretz Kushes V'Abayis, that Mashiach is going to answer all kashas. The first thing is let him come, and when he comes, we will immediately go together with him to Eretz Yisrael. And we will travel on the clouds. It's on Shabbos. How are we allowed to travel more than the Tchum Shabbos? He will come, he will find a solution to this problem as well. Regarding the Rambam, today's Shir and Rambam, the Rebbe spoke in continuation of what he spoke in Purim and what he spoke in last week. We are going to be finishing Rambam, as Rambam is divided according to learning 3 prakim a day. The Siyam Rambam will be taking place within the next couple of weeks, a few days before Pesach. In fact, the Rambam's birthday is Yudalid Nisan Erev Pesach. The Rambam was born on Erev Pesach in the afternoon. Rabbi says this is one of the very few G'dayli Yisrael who we know exactly when they were born. The Rebbe spoke at length Purim and last Shabbos also, and I think he began on Zayin Adar. The Rebbe requested that real big siyumim should be made to participate. Everyone should participate, and to involve more and more Yidden's participation in the siyum of Rambam. Rebbe says it is not important, mustn't necessarily be on the day of the Rambam's birthday. It's Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach is a day when it's hard to congregate people. It could be days before, it could be days after, as long as it should be done properly and in a proper way and in a Bekavidik way. The Rebbe says there are those historians that claim that this year is 850 years from the birth of the Rambam. The Rebbe says he does not know how accurate it is, but if taking this into consideration will also be an assisting factor that these siyums, these celebrations of the completion of the Rambam, should be with yet more participation and with more people and more glory, then the Rebbe says fine, it can also be taken in consideration that it is 850 years from the birth of the Rambam. The Rebbe also pointed out, spoke about it Purim and last Shabbos, that the Goyish countries, the secular countries where the Rambam lived, which is Egypt and Spain and Morocco, are all making tremendous celebrations for the fact that this year is 850 years since the birth of the Rambam. And Mela the Rebbe said, if Goyim are doing it, and Goyim who are known, these countries who are known not to be tremendous lovers of Yidden, especially when the Rebbe spoke about Egypt. The Rebbe said, in Morocco, we do see recently that it is a malchus, it is a kingdom which is expressing friendship and closeness to Yidden. This is what the Rebbe mentioned Purim. However, Mitzrayim, and also we see Spain, these are the countries where the Rambam lived, and these countries are paying big tribute to the Rambam this year. Memela the Rebbe says it would be extremely appropriate that our tribute, the Yiddish tribute which will be done, should definitely be not any less, but by far much, much more than the tribute which the Goyim are making for the Rambam. When the Rebbe spoke about it the first time, the Rebbe said that every area or every community could choose its way of making the proper and right way of making these siyumim, and as long as it should be done in a proper way, the Rebbe says he doesn't even have to be involved, he doesn't have to be asked questions when to make it, or on what place to make it, or on what date to make it. All these inyanim are up to the people who are active in every city or in every country and so forth. The main thing is that it should be a proper celebration, and also at the same time, we always know that when in Torah there is no inyan of finishing. Whenever we finish Torah, we immediately begin anew again. So this will be the closing of this cycle of learning the Rambam, and at the same time it will also be the opening of the new cycle of learning Rambam. And the Rebbe says it's customary in the Farbrengens this year to discuss an inyan which has a shaykhs to the Shia Rambam of that day. Today we are learning the halachas of Sanhedrin. The Rebbe says the way he's discussing it is we talk about it a little bit in the halacha of the Rambam, but primarily it is discussed in the interpretation of Avodas Hashem in the Rambam. What we can derive a lesson in Avodas Hashem. In the halacha of today's Shia, there is a halacha which tells us that if a Bezdin, we know that there were various Sanhedrin. There was a Sanhedrin of 23, and there was a Sanhedrin of 71. So the halacha tells us, if there was a Sanhedrin, Perik Tes in Hilchas Sanhedrin, Sanhedrin sheposchu kulam bedine nefashes tchila, ve'amru kulan chayiv, very strange din. If a Sanhedrin gathered, and they all agreed that this person has to be killed, the halacha is then we do not kill the person. If most of them say that he should be killed, then we go according to the majority, and the person is killed. However, if they all say he has to be killed, then we do not kill. So first of all, the Rebbe says that the question arises, which Sanhedrin is the Rambam talking about? Is he talking about a group of 23, or is he talking about the Sanhedrin of 70? 71. The Rebbe says there are various Mefarshim which get involved in this. It seems to him that the Pshat in the Rambam means that the Rambam is talking about a Sanhedrin of 71. Why? Very simple. Because if we would be talking about the Sanhedrin of 23, the Sanhedrin of 23, whenever they come into a predicament and they don't know what to do, halacha tells us that they are to turn to the Sanhedrin of 71. However, here it happened by the Sanhedrin of 71, and it happened a rare case. But why is this halacha such? If most of them say that he deserves to be killed, then we kill him. If all of them say that he deserves to be killed, then we don't kill him. So, it is explained that when the Bezdin gathers, convenes together, then what happens usually is they go home and they think it over. So when there's a majority saying one way, and even a minority saying the other way, members of the Sanhedrin go home and they think over the case. When all of the Sanhedrin all come up with one opinion, their opinion is that what? That this person, they do not find any merit for him whatsoever, any schus. But they all claim that he has to be killed. So here, nobody's going to, when they're going to walk away, nobody's going to get any thought of schus into his mind. Why? Because it sounds like a closed case to everyone already. We're not going to find any solution here. We're not going to look here for any way to make it easy on this person to find a merit for him. It's like a closed case already. Everybody agreed, all the participants agreed that he deserves Misa Mela. Nobody's going to bother looking for a schus. Why should he go home and think about a schus at night for this person? Chazal is schus be'urta at night. There's no reason for looking for a schus, because it's like he's under the impression that everybody agreed that this person, everyone is under the impression, all the participants of the Sanhedrin are under the impression that everybody has agreed that this person deserves Misa. That is the halacha of it. And that is why, being that nobody is going to bother to find a merit for this person, we're not going to kill. But on the other hand, if everybody claims that he deserves Misa, then he definitely deserves Misa. So why shouldn't he be killed? That means that nobody sees any opening for schus for this person, for merit. So we definitely have to kill him. Rebbe explained it, that Bechlal, Oinshei HaTorah, the punishments of Torah, brought an expression in Gemara. Ochur ata ba'olam hazeh v'i ata ochur lo'olam haba. Gemara talks there about Ochon, who committed tremendous averas. And one day, horrible averas. Gemara says that when a person, the idea of the punishments of Torah is to punish a person that when he comes to the olam haba, there shouldn't be any remembrance of his chait. That is why he gets all types of punishments, is to wipe it, clean him, that when he comes to olam haba, he will be pure. Here we're talking about such a person who has committed to such serious sins, that nobody sees room l'schus for him. What does this mean? It means that we cannot bring this person into Olam Haba. If he will be killed, that means he's already he's wiped out, it's washed out, his Aveira by the fact him being killed. And the Mela, when he comes to the world to come to Olam Haba, he comes up there clean. This person has committed such a crime, that being that nobody sees Mokim l'schus for him, that we cannot, in other words, this person does not deserve to come to Olam Haba pure and clean. And the Rebbe compared it to another halacha. We know that there's a concept of Edom Zaymimin. Edom Zaymimin means false edus. So listen what the halacha is. The halacha is, V'asisam loy, kasher zamam lasis la'achi. If two false edus appear, and if their witness would have been accepted, it would have caused that Reuven, let us say, will be killed. We kill these edus. If it turns out to be that they are false edus, Edom Zaymimin means that they are false edus to the extent how could they be witness on such a story at the time when this story took place, they were in a different city. So they're false edus, right? So there's a Chazal, the Gemara tells us, V'asisem loy kansher zomam, v'loy kansher asa. Listen, it means as follows. Reuven and Shimon came as edus. And with their being witness, they're going to kill Levi. I'm using these names, which is how Gemara usually describes the case. If Levi wasn't killed, they just intended to kill him, then Reuven and Shimon will be killed for this intention, because they would have led to the shedding of blood of a person who doesn't deserve it. However, if Levi was already killed, Kanshar Osa, it was already accomplished, then we do not do anything to Reuven and Shimon. Why is this so? If it didn't come to it. It didn't come to reality. It just could have came to it. We say that we kill them. So why shouldn't we kill them when it came down to a reality? In other words, blood was shed, innocent blood was shed, as a result of them being false witness. They can't be witness on this case. They were in a different city when it happened. So the Ramban explains this explanation. The Ramban explains the whole meaning of killing the Eidos is that the Eidos should have a forgiveness. When it was only a theoretic thing, in other words, those people weren't killed yet, but they could have been killed, then we give them their einish, we give them their punishment. However, when that person was already killed, it was kasher osa. This is not enough to go ahead and kill them. They committed a much worse crime. Killing them will not wash them off their crime. That is why we cannot kill them. What will happen? So the Rebbe says that there's a Rashi in Chumash which tells us, that when a person deserves Misa, he will ultimately get it. Somebody climbs on a ladder and falls off, and he gets the Misa b'sheigeg, and the other one gets the Misa b'meized. It's a Rashi in Chumash. This is how the Indian is explained al pi halacha. In the Hasidic sense, the Rebbe explained it, that every Yid, the Gemara tells us, Yisrael af al pi shechata Yisrael hu. A Yid, even he has sinned, he's still considered a Yid. The Rebbe says, Gemara tells us he has sinned and he's still considered a Yisrael. We know Yidden have two names. Yidden are identified as Yaakov and Yidden are identified as Yisrael. Here we say he has sinned and he's considered a Yisrael. Yisrael is the more choshev a name, and still we give him that name. In other words, a Yid always remains a Yid, regardless what he does. The Rebbe says, when a case comes before a Bezdin, and Bezdin says, everybody says that he's chayiv. Nobody sees room to say that he is zakai. In other words, nobody sees any merit for this Yid. Something is wrong here, the Rebbe says, with this type of a court. It cannot be a proper Yiddish Bezdin that when a Yid comes before them, nobody should be able to find something good on this Yid. How can this be? A Yid always has something good within him. A Yid always has Yisrael afal pi shechata Yisrael, and there's always an inyan of schus in any Yid, no matter what he did. When a Yid comes before a Jewish court, and the entire Jewish court, all the 71 members, and these are not some 71 people, these are 71 people, members in Sanhedrin. Members in Sanhedrin, where did the Sanhedrin convene? They convened at Lishkas HaGozes, they sat in Yerushalayim. And such an outstanding group of people, and they don't find anything positive, anything proper on this Yid, something is wrong. It cannot be that way. And that is why we cannot fulfill such type of a decree from such a bezin. Because every Yid, no matter what he has done, no matter what he went through, no matter how many averos he did, Yisrael, af al pi shechata Yisrael. And this is what the Rebbe says is the remez in this Shir and Rambam. And the Pnimiistic, the Chassidish interpretation of the Rambam, shows us how dear every Yid is. We cannot label a Yid and say that this Yid has no good in him whatsoever. Cannot be. No matter what a Yid has done. Some Yidden have more good, some Yidden have less. By some it is more obvious, by some it is less obvious. But we should go ahead and label a Yid and say that a Yid has nothing in him no good in him whatsoever. This cannot be. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen actually with this inyan, and he said, now we have read Parshas Kisisa. From Parshas Kisisa we're going to enter Parshas Vayakel. Vayakel means the gathering of Yidden. Moshe gathered Yidden. What is symbolic in the fact of gathering Yidden? Gathering Yidden means it's an expression of Achdus Yisrael, Avas Yisrael. Yidden are united, Yidden are together, Yidden have gathered together. And from Parshas Vayakel we go to Parshas Pekudei. Pekudei means the counting of the Yidden. Counting of the Yidden, it is brought in Gemara and it's brought in various Midrashim. What does the counting express? The counting expresses how dear each and every Yid is by the Rebishter. The Yidden were counted, if we look through the entire Torah, Yidden were counted a total of 10 times. What does all of this show? How dear each and every Yid is by the Rebishter. Rabbi used an expression, I think it's an expression of one of the Rabbeim, Imdu hochein kulchem, which means we should all prepare and stay ready for the Avodah, what we have to do. So the Rebbe teaches this, Imdu hochein. If we prepare ourselves and we stand, and hochein, we are preparing ourselves properly, then this will automatically lead to kulchem, that Yidden are united amongst each other. Because when Yidden prepare themselves properly to do proper Avodah Hashem Yisbarach, then they come to the proper realization that when can all this be accomplished? Only when Yidden are be'achtus together. But also in the Farbrengen took mashke from the Farbrengen and he sent it to Eretz Yisrael, particularly to be used in Tveria, because Tveria is the rest place of the Rambam. This is where the cave of the Rambam is. The Rebbe says it should be used in the Siyum of Rambam, which will be made in Tveria, and until then it could also be used at Chassidische Farbrengen. The Rebbe says, "Me lost nicht mashke just as I stehen without using it at Chassidische Farbrengen." Mashke has to be put to good use until it will lead to the ultimate time of Kikulei Mashke, where Mashiach will come. And the Rebbe says, then we will have an opportunity to say L'chaim to Mashiach, and Mashiach will join us in a Chassidische Farbrengen, and we will hear a Geschmacke Maim Chassidus from Mashiach, together with saying L'chaim to him, and Mashke saying L'chaim to Mashiach, and listening to the Geschmacke in Yonim Chassidus, which will be coming forth from Mashiach. A gute Woche. It is just one more moment, please. It is customary, usually in the Koshel Bracha of Metzoy Simchas Torah, Metzoy Shabbos Bereishis, we get a bottle of mashke for this shir here of reviewing the Sichas Kodesh of the Rebbe Zal Gesundsein, which we go through here every Metzoy Shabbos when there is a Farbrengen. I have here, I think tonight is a real appropriate time to say L'chaim on this mashke. I have the mashke here with us. It'll just take us a few minutes. I'll let everybody participate and we will say L'chaim. There is mezainis on the table for everyone to make a bracha and have some fabaisen, and we will say L'chaim on this mashke.